welcome to another episode of the Symphonic Podcast. My name is Bernardo Miethe, and with me, as always, is
Andrew Owen.
Andrew Owen, of course. And today we're going to be talking about Paul Hindemith and his composition Symphonic Metamorphosis. So, Paul Hindemith, he was born on November 16th of 1895, and he died in December 28th of 1963. He was a German composer, violinist, teacher, and conductor. Notable compositions include his song cycle, Das Marienleben of 1923. Did I say it right?
Mary's Life, Das Marienleben.
Marienleben, yeah, that's right. And the opera Mathis der Maler of 1938. Hindemith's most popular work, of course, both on record and in concert hall, is his Symphonic Metamorphosis of themes by Carl Maria von Weber, written in 1943, and that's the piece, of course, we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, it's always good to talk about someone's most important work. And then you can go from there to his way too many sonatas. Because, you can write too many pieces. And, these things happen. He was the kind of guy who could just write a piece willy-nilly. If someone wanted something for this instrument, he just sort of dashed one off. So let's talk then a little bit about his life and career, as is our tradition here. So he was born in Hanau, near Frankfurt am Main. Hindemith was taught the violin as a child, so he was early exposed to this wacky instrument, the violin. He entered Frankfurt's Hochkonservatorium, which I guess just means high conservatory, where he studied the violin with Adolf Rebner, as well as conducting and composition with Arnold Mendelssohn and Bernard Zekels. At first, he supported himself by playing in dance bands and musical comedy groups. Happy good times. He became a deputy leader of the Frankfurt Opera Orchestra in 1914 and was promoted to leader, L-E-A-D-E-R. He was leader of the group in 1917. He played second violin in the Rebner String Quartet from 1914 on for a while. His main exposure to music early on in his life is with playing string instruments in these little groups. Yeah,
not many musical comedy groups that we have nowadays.
Yeah, you don't see a lot of those guys anymore.
Yeah, there's one famous one from Argentina called Les Luthiers. I think they're from Argentina. Les Luthiers. They basically do comedy with classical music. That's the only one I know of.
Kind of like Victor Borge used to do, I guess. Slapstick classical music, or Peter Schickele.
Yeah. So Hindemith was conscripted into the German army in September of 1917 and sent to join his regiment in Alsace in January of 1918. Did I say that right, Andrew?
Alsace.
Alsace.
They speak Alsatian there.
Alsace. So he was sent to Alsace in 1918. Sorry. There he was assigned to play bass drum in the regiment band and also formed a string quartet. In May of 1918, he was deployed to the front in Flanders, where he served as a sentry. His diary shows him, quote, surviving grenade attacks only by good luck, unquote, according to the New Grove Dictionary. After the armistice, he returned to Frankfurt and the Rebner Quartet.
So in 1921, he founded the Amar Quartet, playing viola as usual, and extensively toured Europe. In 1922, some of his pieces were played in the International Society for Contemporary Music, ISCM, a festival over in Salzburg, a city well known for its salt mines. Also happens to be the home of Mozart, which first brought him to the attention of an international audience. This was his first time outside of, getting a little bit of recognition. The following year, he began to work as an organizer of the Donaueschingen Festival. That's a delightful word. Where he programmed works by several avant-garde composers, including Anton Webern and Arnold Schoenberg, whom we haven't talked quite enough about yet, but we'll get more.
We haven't.
We'll talk about Schoenberg. Why not?
Yes.
In 1927, he was appointed professor at the Berliner Hochschule für Musik in Berlin. So he was doing that as teaching music. Hindemith wrote the music for Hans Richter's 1928 avant-garde film Ghosts Before Breakfast. Vormittagsspuk. Before breakfast, spook. Ghosts Before Breakfast. Although the score was subsequently lost, and he also acted in the film. In 1929, he played the solo part in the premiere of William Walton's Viola Concerto after Lionel Tertis, for whom it was written, turned it down. So yes, William Walton has, I guess that should be William Walton's big claim to fame, is that his viola concerto was premiered by Paul Hindemith.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually a big viola concerto that's played a lot. It's kind of funny that Hindemith is the one that premiered it.
He created the role. Yeah, William Walton. I mean, we don't talk about him very much in music history, but people do his music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. During the 1930s, Hindemith made a visit to Cairo and several visits to Ankara, where, at the invitation of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, he led the task of reorganizing Turkish music education and the early efforts of the establishment of the Turkish State Opera and Ballet. Towards the end of the 1930s, he made several tours in America as a viola and viola d'amore soloist, which is this instrument that really nobody plays anymore.
It's a weird little instrument too. It's got just a lot of strings. Mm-hmm. Viola d'amore, it's kind of like a sitar violin, sitar viola. It's got all these sympathetic strings behind it. I think that's a viola d'amore, right? Yeah. It's a really rich sounding instrument. It sounds, I think, a little deeper than the viola. I mean, I think it's probably just another attempt to make the viola sound more like an instrument. Which is fine, viola. I mean, it's an imperfectly designed instrument because it's too small for the strings, so the strings aren't as taut as they are on a cello or a violin. It should be half, like right between the size of a cello and a violin, yet it's still a little smaller, so it'll fit on your neck. So it sort of loses a lot of its timbre. So the viola d'amore, I think, kind of tries to combat that with some sympathetic strings that are hidden behind. So Hindemith's relationship to the Nazis is a complicated one and worth talking about a little bit. Some condemned his music as degenerate and datita, they would say, largely based on his early sexually charged operas such as Sancta Susanna. And in December 1934, during a speech at the Berlin Sports Palace, Germany's Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, publicly denounced Hindemith as an atonal noisemaker. And I say, if you can make the Nazis angry, gosh darn it, you've done well as a musician.
Exactly. Other officials working in Nazi Germany, though, thought that he might provide Germany with an example of a modern German composer, as by this time he was writing music based in tonality, with frequent references to folk music. The conductor, Wilhelm Furtwängler, defended Hindemith, and he published his defense in 1934, which takes precisely this line, trying to say that Hindemith was an actual German composer. That they should actually celebrate him.
Yeah, why not, right? If only the Russians would have learned that. So, the controversy around his work continued throughout the 30s, with the composer falling in and out of favor with the Nazi hierarchy. He finally immigrated to Switzerland in 1938, in part because his wife was of partially Jewish ancestry. Now, not everybody knows that he went to Switzerland, but apparently that's just a fact that everyone's supposed to know. I remember seeing that on my diagnostic exam when I started my degree here. Like, apparently you're supposed to know. Like, you're supposed
went to Switzerland.
Yeah, they gave you 4 options. Which one of these people immigrated to wherever, and one of them didn't. Which one of them did not? It's just like, you have to know everybody's biography. Anyway, yeah, he did go to Switzerland in 1938. Was not a pleasant place to be if you want to stay in a happy marriage with someone who is alive. So, I mean, it's an unpleasant situation.
Yeah. So in 1935, the Turkish government commissioned Hindemith to reorganize that country's musical education, and more specifically, to prepare material for the Universal and Turkish Polyphonic Music Education Program. For all related institutions in Turkey, a feat which he accomplished to some acclaim there in Turkey. Sorry.
So yeah, this development seems to have been supported by the Nazi regime. It may have got him conveniently out of the way, yet at the same time he propagated a German view of musical history and education. I mean, Hindemith himself said that he believed he was being an ambassador for German culture. He really wanted to get Germans feeling nice and German. And Hitler wanted the same too, so it seems like they were, he did okay, but could have done, I don't know, probably a little safer than, I don't know.
Yeah. So Hindemith did not stay in Turkey as long as many others. Nevertheless, he greatly influenced the development of Turkish musical life. The Ankara State Conservatory owes much of his efforts. In fact, Hindemith was regarded as a real master, quote unquote, by young Turkish musicians, and he was appreciated and greatly respected.
Yeah. So in 1940, Hindemith immigrated to the United States. So he was one of the many composers who found their way to the United States during and after the World War.
Yeah.
So at the same time that he was codifying his musical language, his teaching and compositions began to be affected by his theories, according to critics like Ernest Saint-Germain, whom we've talked about. I think we've talked about him before. He's just a pretty well known. He did Histoire du Soldat. He was the guy that did that for Stravinsky. Once in the United States, he taught primarily at Yale University, where he had such notable students as Lucas Foss, Graham George, Norman Della Gioia, Mel Powell, Yehudi Weiner, Harold Shapiro, Hans Otto, Ruth Schontal, Leonard Saracen, and Oscar-winning film director George Roy Hill. So working at Yale, I mean, this is just a wacky thing that I remember hearing in a lecture back in 2009, where apparently Hindemith teaching there at Yale was a big proponent of having boards, having chalkboards on the wall that had staff lines on them. And the musicology person there at Yale did not want the lines. He wanted the boards to be nice and clean. Of course, they wanted to keep Paul there, and they wanted to keep the musicologist there, so they wound up building two music buildings. So that one would have boards and the other would. That's what they say. I don't know if that's true. So if you ever go to Yale and wonder why there are two music buildings, I think that might be the reason. I could be wrong. I've never been to Yale.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Apparently Hindemith had something to do with that. So during this time, he also gave the Charles Eliot Norton lectures at Harvard, from which the book A Composer's World was extracted. Hindemith had that book done in 1952. Hindemith had a long friendship with Erich Katz, whose own compositions were influenced by him. So he had a lot of influence there, mostly with people that people have never heard of, but that's okay. Norman Della Gioia was literally the only name I recognize on that list.
Exactly. I was about to tell you exactly the same thing, that Della Gioia is the only one that I know.
And I still couldn't tell you anything that Della Gioia has ever written. I'm sure other people can. I don't even know the guy's work.
Yeah, it's the only name I recognize, actually. Yeah. So Hindemith became an American citizen in 1946, but he returned to Europe in 1953, living in Zurich and teaching at the university there. Towards the end of his life, he began to conduct more and made numerous recordings, mostly of his own music, of course.
Oh, yes. So, an anonymous critic writing an opera magazine in 1954, having attended the performance of Hindemith's Neues vom Tage, noted that Mr. Hindemith is no virtuoso conductor, but he does possess an extraordinary knack of making performers understand how his own music is supposed to go. Which I guess that's fine. You could say the same of Eric Whitacre, I'm sure. He was awarded the Balzan Prize in 1962, and that's a relatively prestigious prize.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you're supposed to know how your own music goes, right?
I guess. I mean, I know plenty of people who are really bad at their own music. Don't get me wrong, but it's okay.
Yeah. So after a prolonged decline in his physical health, although he composed almost to his death, Hindemith died in Frankfurt from pancreatitis at the age of 68. So now we're going to talk a little bit about his style, his music. Hindemith is amongst the most significant German composers of his time. His early works are in a late Romantic idiom, and he later produced expressionist works rather in the style of early Arnold Schoenberg, before developing a leaner, contrapuntally complex style in the 1920s. This style has been described as neoclassical, but it is very different from the works of Igor Stravinsky labeled with that term, owing more to the contrapuntal language of Johann Sebastian Bach and Max Reger than the classical clarity of Mozart. Yeah. So, you know, when we talk about neoclassicism, we usually think of Stravinsky, but here Hindemith kind of wrote in a style similar to it, but not in the style of Mozart, more in the style of Bach.
Yeah,
kind of strange.
Neoclassical. His music can be kind of difficult to enjoy on the first listen. It takes some getting used to.
Yeah.
So the new style can be heard in a series of works called Kammermusik, or chamber music, from 1922 to 27. Each of these pieces is written for a different small instrumental ensemble, many of them very unusual. Kammermusik number 6, for example, is a concerto for the viola d'amore, an instrument really had not been in wide use since the Baroque period, and still has not been used since Hindemith tried to get it out there. He continued to write for unusual groups throughout his life. He did produce a trio for viola, heckelphone, and piano. Now, if you think you know all of the instruments of the orchestra, the heckelphone still is kind of a relatively obscure instrument. Heckelphone is just it's a very large English horn. It's a very large oboe. So instead of being an oboe, which is about yay big, about less than a yard long, the English horn's a little longer. The heckelphone is to the floor. And it has a big bulb at the end of it. A really strange instrument, but it has the range of a bassoon, but the timbre of an oboe. Really lovely instrument. He wrote 7 trios for 3 trautoniums in 1930. This is a sonata for double bass and a concerto for trumpet, bassoon, and strings, both in 49. For example, he was fascinated by just giving the other unappreciated instruments just a little more attention, which is nice. You spend all the time learning the instrument. It doesn't hurt to try it out. The trautonium, monophonic electronic instrument, invented 1929 in Berlin. So it is a German instrument.
Yeah,
I don't know this instrument at all. I'm looking it up.
Yeah, me neither. So as soon as it was invented, basically, he wrote for it.
It's like, what a weird-looking thing. It's very strange. Just one pitch at a time. I guess it's kind of like a theremin, but a little less antenna-y.
That's cool.
I don't know. Wacky.
Yeah.
Anyway, he wrote for that.
Yeah, so around the 1930s, Hindemith began to write less for chamber groups and more for large orchestral forces. Between 1933 and 35, Hindemith wrote his opera Mathis der Maler, based on the life of the painter Matthias Grunwald. And this opera is rarely staged, though a well-known production by the New York City Opera in 1995 was an exception. It combines the neoclassicism of earlier works with folk song. As a preliminary stage to the composing of this opera, Hindemith wrote a purely instrumental symphony, also called Mathis der Maler, which is one of his most frequently performed works. In the opera, some portions of the symphony appear as instrumental interludes, others were elaborated in vocal scenes.
Yeah. Hindemith wrote a piece called Music for Use, German Gebrauchsmusik. Gebrauchsmusik. Compositions intended to have a social or political purpose, and sometimes written to be played by amateurs. The concept was inspired by Bertolt Brecht. An example of this is his Trauermusik, his funeral music, written in January of '36. Hindemith was preparing the London premiere of Die Schwanentreiber when he heard news of the death of George V. He quickly wrote this piece for solo viola and string orchestra in tribute to the late king, and the premiere was given that same evening, the day after the king's death. Just to give you an example of Hindemith's speed.
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty outrageous. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So other examples of Hindemith's Gebrauchsmusik include the Plöne Musiktage, a series of pieces designed for a day of community music making open to all inhabitants of the city of Plön, culminating in an evening concert by gymnasium students and teachers. I mean, that is pure use. I never wrote a piece for this. A scherzo for viola and cello written in '34, which was written in several hours during a series of recording sessions as a filler for an unexpected blank side of a 78 RPM album, and recorded immediately upon its completion. I mean, this guy worked quick. He just polished one of these things off. Wir bauen eine Stadt. We're building a city, which was an opera for 8-year-olds. Hindemith, what a wacky guy.
Yeah.
You can't make this stuff up. We're building. Wir bauen eine Stadt. But he wrote lots of music that was to be done for a purpose, and often these pieces were not meant for posterity.
Yeah.
But luckily we still have them.
Exactly. So Hindemith's most popular work, both on record and in the concert hall, like we said, is probably it is the Symphonic Metamorphosis on themes by Carl Maria von Weber, written in 1943. It takes melodies from various works by Weber, mainly piano duets, but also one from the overture to his incidental music of Turandot, and transforms and adapts them so that each movement of the piece is based on one theme. And we're going to talk more about it in just a second.
Yeah. In 1951, Hindemith completed his symphony in B-flat. This was scored for a concert band. It was written for the U.S. Army Band's Pershing's Own, Pershing being an important military figure. Those funny little hats that have the thing on the top and go straight back. It's called a Pershing style cap. I think he kind of invented that. Hindemith premiered it with that band on April 5th of that year. Its second performance took place under the baton of Hugh Macmillan, conducting the Boulder Symphonic Band at the University of Colorado. The piece is representative of his late works, exhibiting strong contrapuntal lines throughout, and is a cornerstone of the band repertoire. So if anyone in your music department knows who Hindemith is, it's more than likely going to be your bandos. And that's right. Perfectly fine. It's good that they get a real composer. That's not nice. No, so Hindemith recorded it in stereo with members of the Philharmonia Orchestra for EMI in 1956. So it was a piece that got a lot of fame.
Yeah, I played it before. Yes, it's a good piece. So let's talk about his musical system. Most of Hindemith's music employs a unique system that is tonal but non-diatonic. Like most tonal music, it is centered on a tonic and modulates from one tonal center to another, but it uses all 12 tones freely rather than relying on a scale picked as a subset of these notes. Hindemith even rewrote some of his music after developing the system. One of the key features of this system is that he ranks all musical intervals of the 12-tone equally tempered scale from the most consonant to the most dissonant. He classifies chords in 6 categories on the basis of how dissonant they are, whether or not they contain a tritone, and whether or not they clearly suggest a root or tonal center. Hindemith's philosophy also encompasses melody. He strove for melodies that do not clearly outline major or minor triads. So he kind of invented his own music theory, his own system here.
He did.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's why we don't know any of his melodies off the top of our head.
Exactly.
None of them are in major and minor triads.
But that's also why his music sounds so unique also.
It is. I mean, it sounds like I hear a lot of it, and it just sort of goes in one out, in one ear out the other sometimes, just the way it's written. If it had something to latch onto, there's nothing to be ashamed of. I guess I just always have this, have it in for equal tempered anything.
Mm-hmm.
But that's okay. So in the late 1930s, Hindemith wrote a theoretical book, The Craft of Musical Composition. Volume 1, Hindemith wrote in 1937, which lays out this system in great detail. He also advocated this system as a means of understanding and analyzing the harmonic structure of other music, claiming that it has a broader reach than the traditional Roman numeral approach to chords, which is an approach that's strongly tied to the diatonic scales. It works best for Bach. Mm-hmm. Bach chorales, just making sense of what the chords are in relation to function.
Mm-hmm.
So in the final chapter of Book 1, Hindemith seeks to illustrate the wide-ranging relevance and applicability of his system in analysis of music examples ranging from the early origins of European music to the contemporary. These analyses include an early Gregorian melody and compositions by Guillaume de Machaut, J.S. Bach, Richard Wagner, Igor Stravinsky, Arnold Schoenberg, and finally a composition of his own. So he was very fascinated in just figuring stuff out. He was a theorist as much as he was a composer.
Yeah, I mean that's his German mind right there.
He likes to make it all make sense, all fit into
Exactly.
a nice little neat system.
Yeah.
And that way you can be like Schenker.
Exactly.
I mean, you don't even have to be as racist as Schenker. You can just make your own little theory.
Yeah, I was about to mention Schenker too, that he basically did the same thing.
Oh yeah.
So his piano works of the early 1940s, Ludus Tonalis, contains 12-tone fugues in the manner of Johann Sebastian Bach, each connected by an interlude during which the music moves from one key of the last fugue to the key of the next one. The order of the keys follows Hindemith's ranking of musical intervals around the tonal center of C.
Yeah, so one traditional aspect of classical music that Hindemith retains is the idea of dissonance resolving to a consonance. Now granted, it's not in the traditional way of resolution, but it does resolve. It goes from dissonance to consonance, and it does end pleasantly usually. So much of Hindemith's music begins in a consonant territory, progresses rather smoothly into dissonance, and then resolves at the end in full consonant chords. This is especially apparent in his concert music for strings and brass, one of his many, many works.
Mm-hmm. All right. So now we arrive at the piece that we're going to be talking about today, which is, of course, the Symphonic Metamorphosis on themes by Carl Maria von Weber. And this is an orchestral work written by, of course, Paul Hindemith in 1943. It was composed between 1940 and 1943. Its length is about 20 minutes, so it's a very quick piece. It's orchestrated for a piccolo, 2 flutes, 2 oboes, an English horn, 2 clarinets, a bass clarinet, 2 bassoons, a contrabassoon, 4 horns, 2 trumpets, 3 trombones, a tuba, a timpani, and extensive percussion section here: bass drums, chimes, cymbals, glockenspiel, small cymbals, small gong, snare drum, tambourine, tenor drum, tom-tom, triangle, and of course strings.
I just throw some strings in there, why not?
Yeah, a big percussion section. I mean, a lot of percussion instruments.
All of the orchestra, all the instruments are in it, pretty much, except for the heckelphone, of course. Sorry, heckelphonists. Heckelphonists. So Hindemith's Symphonic Metamorphosis on themes of Carl Maria von Weber began life in the early year 1940, early part of the year, when Hindemith first took up residence in the United States after several years of public and private jousting with the Nazi government in his native Germany. So the Nazis, like we said, officially called his music degenerate, although they may have been responding to his private but hardly secret expressions of detestation regarding their policies. So there was sort of a love-hate relationship with Hindemith and the Nazis. I think mostly hate, but he did find his way out. Out of the Germany's less pleasant history.
Mm-hmm. So Hindemith sketched a series of movements based on themes by Weber to be used in a ballet for a dance company run by Leonid Massenet, who had already collaborated with Hindemith on the ballet Noblissima Vision. The project died when Hindemith and Massenet had one too many artistic differences, not to put too fine a point on it, but Massenet had the staging ideas which would have used the backdrops by Salvador Dali, and these were kind of weird for Hindemith. And Massenet also thought that Hindemith's score was too personal, whatever that means. So in 1943, Hindemith redid the music into the Metamorphosis, in the process turning into a splashy, colorful orchestral piece of the sort that American audiences in particular seemed to like. It was an immediate success when it was premiered by Arthur Roditsky and the New York Philharmonic in January of 1944, and it has remained perhaps Hindemith's most popular work, even if critics often feel compelled to denigrate it.
Oh yes, it's so easy to denigrate anything by Hindemith, right? So Weber was Carl Maria von Weber was very early on, 1786 to 1826, sort of Beethoven, Schubert era. Mm-hmm. He was an important figure in the development of German opera. He was a very important influence on Romanticism. He retained an importance among later composers that would scarcely guess from the limited exposure that he gets at modern concert halls. I mean, honestly, a lot of people don't know Weber's music that well these days, despite the fact that everyone knew his music back then. It's sort of a Daniel Aubert figure,
forgotten.
Like you know about Aubert if you study French grand opera in the early 19th century, but otherwise you're not going to know who he is. Yeah. But Weber has a little more fame. People do know his stuff. Mm-hmm. Victor Borge used to use Weber's music occasionally. He used to call him Carl and his sister Maria. This says Maria. He's a male. Why does he have Maria in his name? It's perfectly fine. So anyway, the themes Hindemith used are from some of Weber's most obscure works, so that makes it even better. Obscure composers, most obscure works. And it came to Hindemith's attention because they could all be found in one volume of piano duets that he owned. So like we said, Hindemith was a very practical man. Hindemith not only retained all but one of the themes almost exactly as Weber wrote them, but also preserved much of the formal structure of the pieces as well, so that it is possible to follow the general outlines of Hindemith's score while listening to Weber's music, or vice versa, and have a pretty good idea of what's going on. So Hindemith alters nearly everything else. He makes radical changes to the harmony, adds to the music both vertically, that is with different harmonies and new counter melodies, and horizontally, so he extends phrases or entire sections. He does new and fun things, kind of like what Stravinsky did with Pulcinella in his brand of neoclassicism.
Yeah. The surprising thing is that Hindemith's end product, while staying so close to Weber, sounds so little like the original. For example, in the first movement, based on the fourth of 8 piano duets, Opus 60, there are few hints of the 19th century aside from the middle section theme given to the oboe. This is followed by one of Hindemith's niftier touches. When the principal theme returns in the violas and clarinets, he has the flute play in parallel an octave and a fifth higher, and the piccolo in parallel 2 octaves and a third higher. They act much like mixture stops on an organ and make the orchestra sound more like a little a little like a calliope.
Calliope. So
Calliope, yeah, calliope is steam, the steam organ-looking instrument.
if you ever want to visit New Orleans, you can have a good old calliope experience.
Oh man, that calliope is very out of tune.
Beautifully out of tune, yes. I mean, steam, the faster your steam goes through it, it sort of bends the pitch a little bit.
Yeah, it's fun.
And it's loud, it's so loud. It just covers the whole city of New Orleans.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great part of the city, though.
Oh, yeah.
So this symphony, the Symphonic Metamorphosis, is in 4 movements. You have an allegro, an scherzo, an lentino, and a march.
Marsh. So the first, third, and fourth movements of the Symphonic Metamorphosis are excerpted from several of Weber's piano duets, as I mentioned earlier. The second movement borrows from incidental music Weber composed for Schiller's translation of Turandot. Within each movement, we can hear Weber's original music, transformed into Hindemith's own distinctive voice. Hindemith's treatment is by turns playful and tender, exuberant and restrained. His sense of humor can be heard in his witty use of wind instruments and brasses in the first movement, a raucous polka. The opening movement is based on the fourth of Weber's 8 pieces, Opus 60 for piano duet. Weber described it as all Ungherese, all'ungherese, and indeed there is an unmistakable Hungarian flavor to the fiery first theme, that it means like a Hungarian, all'ungherese. The second theme is a proclamation from the brass and choral style, which is later wittily developed in inverted form by various woodwind instruments, beginning with the oboe and extending from the piccolo down to the contrabassoon.
The second movement is based on Weber's incidental music to Schiller's adaptation of Turandot, the same Carlo Gozzi fantasy about China that Puccini used for his 1926 opera. Weber took his melody from Jacques Rousseau's 1787 Dictionnaire de Musique. Rousseau had gotten it from a sinologist, but as perceptive a musicology as he was a philosopher, cautioned that it had likely been adapted to Western ears in the transmission, and its authenticity was therefore suspect. It was nonetheless as close as Weber was going to get to a real Chinese melody, and he used it almost exclusively in 5 of the 6 numbers he wrote for the play. It is the only tune that Hindemith alters significantly, but his insistent repetition of the tune is molded on Weber's Turandot overture. Hindemith repeats it 8 times in different settings, building to a splashy climax. The brass then takes a syncopating variant of the theme and turns it into a fugue.
So then a quiet pastoral piece in ternary form follows. Its outer sections feature the solo clarinet singing a lyrical theme based on the second of Weber's piano duet pieces from Opus 10. The central portion consists of a particularly rich, even sensuous theme that might easily serve as the basis for a vocalization as well. So you could imagine that this is something a person could sing. The reprise of the clarinet theme is richly embroidered by a continuous fine tracery in the flute. This solo, this is a huge flute solo that is in a lot of auditions. So if you're a flute player, you need to know this flute solo. I have to learn it now.
Yeah, it's complicated, and I've had the good fortune of playing it before. So for the concluding march, based on Weber's Opus 60, number 7, Hindemith used a theme originally intended by Weber as a funeral march, dressing it up first with eerie, ghostly effects and colors, then transforming it into something nobly tragic. The mood suddenly changes as the horns announces a joyous new theme against skittering woodwinds. The death theme momentarily clouds the picture again, but Hindemith concludes his Symphonic Metamorphosis with a spectacular display of orchestral brilliance based on a horn quartet motif. The horn calls implicit in Weber's trio section are made explicit in Hindemith's version and become the basis of this requisite big finish. So it ends happy.
Yay! Yeah, that's again more of Hindemith's approach to harmony. Start consonant, get dissonant, and then end consonant.
Consonant, yeah.
Sort of his version of a ternary or a sonata or hero's journey.
Ternary, yeah. Mm-hmm. Anything else you want to say about Hindemith?
Well, there's not a whole lot to say about Hindemith outside of what we've said already. I think that he's he's underappreciated in the musicological world, but he's still championed by band people and by violists and heckelphonists and viola-d'amorists, and it's important to have these available to people. Now he's very good. I remember seeing. I was telling you about this before we were recording an article. It's a fake article from sort of an Onion-like thing talking about coming across another Hindemith sonata. This guy wrote so many sonatas; they just keep popping up out of nowhere. That's just like everything else he wrote. No, but it's fun. Hindemith is still in Paul Hindemith, or Hindemith has always has maintained his presence in musical discourse, and people still do his music a lot. Really cool guy.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, like, it's our tradition too. It's a very small piece, so it's a small podcast too.
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, of course, thank you so much for listening again. If you want to email us and have any questions, you can, of course, email us at symphonypodcast@gmail.com. You can, of course, find us on iTunes, and you can find us on YouTube. And, of course, if you have a podcast app on your phone, you can just subscribe to our Symphony podcast. And, of course, until next time, thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Bye-bye.
Yay! That's another one in the bag.
Another one done.
I'll polish them off like a Hindemith sonata.